When it comes to polyamory or open relationships, one of the first people that I can remember hearing talk publicly about them is Margaret Cho. This was in 2012 on The Wendy Williams Show, and she spoke about her relationship with her husband and also her boyfriend. Here's a clip.
I have a boyfriend, yes.
Okay.
And we are, in our relationship, monogamous.
Okay, but you still sleep with your husband?
No. I've decided right now, I know this is so complicated, I know it just sounds really bizarre, but I just want to be in this one relationship at this time.
Yeah, now is your husband in a relationship with another woman out there? Okay,
yes.
So, but you guys are married?
Yes.
Now, I know it's cliche to say, but some cliches are true, and that's the case here when I say that Margaret Cho has always been ahead of her time. In her comedy, in interviews, she's shown this comfort and willingness to engage in conversations about the things that tend to scare people the most to talk about. I'm talking about sex, leather, masturbation, sex, being a dominatrix, sex, BDSM, sex. Did I mention sex? We talk a lot about sex, and I wanted to play this interview, which we recorded in 2019, originally for the Luminary app. I wanted to play it because one, I love it, and two, to kick off our newest season. That's right, we're back this coming Tuesday with all new interviews, so mark your calendars, please. And until then, I'm Jeffrey Masters, and from the Advocate magazine in partnership with GLAAD, please enjoy this LGBTQ&A with Margaret Cho. You've said that the basis for your comedy is the feeling of being an outsider, that it all comes back to that. And yet, over the course of your career, culture has really changed in that we've become more comfortable talking about sex, more comfortable talking about open relationships. Do you feel like we've caught up to you in a sense?
I think so. I think culture is caught up in a lot of ways. I'm so late to the party, but I'm watching Assassination of Gianni Versace. And I was around during 90s gayness. Throughout the series, it's a lot about homophobia and how prevalent it was in the 90s, so much so that we didn't even feel like we could participate in things like laws or life, you know? And so now I think there is a really different attitude towards gayness, towards sex, towards different kinds of partnerings, towards different kinds of gender. You know, there's a lot of movement and a lot of change. Of course, lots going backwards too. But in the trajectory of gay rights, we've really come an incredibly long way. Also to have been around the beginning of that and kind of witnessed and talked about it and did comedy throughout that, it does feel like, you know, maybe now I'm starting to feel like a bit of an insider getting there.
That's a really interesting adjustment for you.
Mm-hmm. And it's good. I mean, that's the whole reason why I wanted to be in comedy. I watched Joan Rivers in the 80s, and she had such a rapport with the audience, and they already knew her catchphrases that, can we talk? Can we talk? Like, as if we've talked before. And so that familiarity made me think, wow, comedian has instant friends. And that was really kind of all I was looking for, was instant friends.
You know, you mentioned the gay rights movement. Compared to gay people, bisexuality and the understanding and awareness has remained relatively flat. Mm-hmm. There's not been this big cultural touchstone in the way that like Will and Grace changed it for gay people.
Yeah.
Beyond representation for bi people, do you have any grand theories to why it still is so misunderstood?
I think it's because people use bisexuality as the lie before I get to the truth. It's like being bisexual is usually the last lie because you're acknowledging your own difference, you're acknowledging your otherness, but you're not willing to go all the way. So to say that you're bi, it's a lot of people, like when they're coming out, they'll stop at bi, at their first utterance of who I am. I'm going to give you bisexual. I'm going to give this lie to my parents so that maybe there's hope for them to hang on to this idea that half of me could be straight. Before we had gay marriage and before we had this idea of like, you know, being able to have a partner and have families, you know, like bisexuality gave you a little bit of a sliver of that ticket to normalcy. You didn't get the whole ticket because obviously you are other, but it's something that people could also use to be like lorded over others as we're the more dangerous ones because we're bisexual. So often like glam rock goes through a bi phase as we see in like Lou Reed or Iggy Pop or David Bowie, of course, and those are the sort of the famous examples. So bisexuality is kind of this strange thing of like dipping your toe into the pool of otherness, but not all in.
And so for so many queer people, what you're saying is that they come out as bisexual and then gay or then lesbian. And so because it was like a lie for me, I think it's a lie for you too.
Yes. So it must be that you're doing the same thing, but you're taking it so far. It's kind of this thing where also bisexuality can be snatched back. You couldn't hold on to Angelina Jolie's bisexuality for very long, or Anna Paquin's, or maybe Julianne Hough's, or whatever. For guys, it's a lot tougher because for men, all that anybody can imagine you is being gay too. So guys have much more of a strident sense of identity when it comes to gayness. Like you don't have that same kind of fluidity, or we don't accept it as a society from men as we do with women.
I also feel like for like queer men, we come out and we get loud, and like queer women come out and then they stay at home.
Yeah, it is different. It's a different experience. Like our gayness is worn in a different fashion. Sometimes women are kind of looked at sort of like more about going into this establishment mentality or going into like the family mentality. So you have that sort of idea of like the lesbian who has a lot of kids and a lot of animals, and that's sort of like they're the nurturers at home, where gay men are out making strides, doing all of the things, decorating homes or whatever we these stereotypes that we have about what gay people do, what lesbians do. Those stereotypes are archetypes. They're rooted in a kind of envisioning of like, what can we actually go and be? Because my sexuality is not accepted. Maybe if I do something that's sort of preordained, whether that's styling, being a florist, doing those sort of aesthetic jobs, those aesthetic things that, gay men are purported to have, that the eye, as we see, of course, queer eye. There's a lot of good things that happen with those sort of aspirational sort of archetypes that we can be, but there's also a limiting of like, we're not imagining that we can be other things too.
And there is this like option paralysis. We've shucked this standard from that society's told us is right. And it's like, oh God, do we have to now reconsider all standards for everything?
Yeah, it's really deep, and it gets to be a lot. So it's almost like society puts so many things on us, and we're like, where does my desire to do this begin, and where does the societal conditioning begin? It's very hard to know.
Ellen has told the story about before she came out, she would have conversations with other closeted lesbians, like Melissa Etheridge, and being like, oh my God, we're both in the closet. There's no one out. Did you have any camaraderie like that with any queer women or bisexuals back then?
I think, there was more fear around it. Like, I remember I was sitting on Leah Delaria's lap in 1991. It's years ago. And my manager at the time was so panicked that I was gay. And he was like, you have to present yourself as straight. I don't care what you do or who you are. As far as we're going, you're straight. And I was just really scared into a feeling of like, wow, this feels really scary and unsafe. Of course, somebody like Leah, who is she and I sort of made up this sort of like very old school femme butch dynamic that you can't help but sit in her lap. It's just that kind of a thing. I think for us, it wasn't as easy to kind of slip into any other sort of way of being, because it was so placed on us,
Wait, how old were you during that story?
I was about 20.
Oh, because
21.
I always assumed you were always out of the closet and like open about being bi.
I always was. But then at that time, it was like, I didn't even know we could even call it that. Like I didn't even know what you could say. Because even though I had grown up in a very gay, positive environment, my parents owned a gay bookstore, and there was so many examples of very, very exciting things happening around me, with like Harvey Milk and this gay pride parade that was growing and growing and growing every year. But there was like a real confusion around bisexuality. Even like my parents, they're fine with gayness. They're fine with straightness. They have a real problem with bi. They really don't get that, because that's like, you're not deciding.
Did you, when you were coming out, wonder if you were just a lesbian?
Yeah. Well, I initially identified as a lesbian, and then it wasn't the right thing, because I was also attracted to men too. So it wasn't the right thing to say. I couldn't just say, well, I'm, just a lesbian. It's not as easy as that.
You were saying you were 20 years old, and with the Leah Delaria story, was it easier to just not talk about your sexuality and like quote unquote hide back then?
I guess so. I think because there was just this assumption that we just didn't exist. So there was just no real sense of any of that. Like people just didn't ask those questions because it was, too much information in a way. Like people were, showbiz was very different too. There was a very curated image that you were kind of putting out there. And I was so young, and so much of my comedy was about queer stuff and about San Francisco and about sex. So it was impossible to really kind of get away from that.
And have you always been so comfortable talking about sex? Like, is that just who you are?
I think so. Just because I started comedy so young, it just seemed like at that time, it was easy to talk about sex because it was that was a way to get people to really pay attention. And then also I was really discovering a lot. So I was at these weird day jobs. So I was working at this lesbian BDSM collective where they were making like leather dildos and stuff. And they had play parties. And so I was helping them open their retail store. I was learning all about BDSM and learning all about all this different kind of stuff. And sex was different too because we were looking for a way that we could still be queer, but also in the age of AIDS, like what does safe sex mean? And how do we still make it exciting and fun? And, because dental dams were not fun. And so we wanted to figure out how do we make sex dangerous for us, but not really dangerous in that, like we're not fluid bonding. So BDSM was a perfect place to celebrate that and to explore that even further. So talking about that was really, I was fascinated because I was discovering it as it was happening. And, it was something that was very appealing to talk about too.
And so for you, BDSM, that came out of the AIDS crisis?
Yes.
That is so interesting.
Yeah. We were trying to figure out how to keep sex hot and keep it interesting. And
dangerous, like you said.
Yeah. Like what BDSM does is it really puts the danger back into sexuality when I think so much of it, that you sort of think about mentally, like about AIDS and about how so much of it was like we're separating ourselves. We have to have like this layer of latex between us and the world. So how can we now go back and really like be gay and be in it and be of it, and so BDSM was the answer then.
And so when you say that you have a history of alternative sexuality, are you talking about BDSM?
Yeah.
I've never actually heard that term, alternative sexuality.
Yeah, it's very alternative and but it's also very San Francisco. San Francisco is like so much like if you're going anywhere, you're low key listening to people talking about their limits. Like what's a hard limit? What's a soft limit? People are always like negotiating their scenes.
What were your limits?
My limits, I don't like blood play. I don't like a stingy pain. Don't come at me with the cane. No canes. I'm not particularly fond of race play. However, some people really like it. I don't like it. Oh, I do love a hood. I love a hood and I love a human play. There's like a human puppy play park. So I love having like the human dogs. That's the great one too. So then you get into sort of furry territory where people are like very like animals. I love that. But I don't know if that's so much about a sexual impulse as much as it's about playtime. Because I love
so
animals.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you still engage in BDSM?
No, for me, I get polyamory fatigue and I get total BDSM fatigue. It takes so much energy in terms of negotiating and what you want and what you're doing. And I just don't have the energy for it. And also the processing that happens. So I did get tired of it. To me, it's very stuck in the maybe the 90s and early 2000s, but I do love it. And I do love like the Folsom Street Fair is amazing. Like the game, and then I love that gay men are always at the forefront of leather sex. Like they're the ones that are inventing stuff. They're the ones who are setting the tone for the future. And that's really amazing because there's a faction of S&M too. Sometimes it gets kind of mega. It's weird because it's like it attracts a lot of very conservative people who are blue collar. So when you see this mix of very kind of conservative types who are looking at gay men in this very idealized way, then I think that's really fascinating because you have this thing of like, well, we may be conservative, but we're all still freaky too. So that there's a kind of understanding. That's what I really loved about the leather community is that they had all of these people that you wouldn't even realize are total fans that are really into this and really admiring what gay men do. And I think that's cool.
And so are you getting to know people in that community to know that they're like, they lean more MAGA?
Yeah. Like at that time, they wouldn't, we wouldn't have words for, we didn't have MAGA then, but they were just, I guess Republicans or people who were like, had guns, people who were like, just not the kind of people that we would hang out with or that I would. And so I was amazed that they were like so open-minded when it came to leather, came to gay men, came to like, there's this like S&M club in North Hollywood. They're always in North Hollywood. So I met a lot of these different guys there, these different very heteronormative, very conservative guys, but who were like into leather sex. And so oftentimes these gay leather organizations would rent their play spaces. And so all of these straight guys would want to come and watch because the gay guys were doing stuff that you couldn't believe and that you had to see.
And they would want to watch the gay guys fucking.
Yeah, so that they could get ideas on what they could do to be inventive when they go with their submissives and do whatever.
Wow.
So, I mean, it was like, I've never even, I think it's such an amazing thing that these, super straight, some ex-military, some like cops, like these guys that you just would never even ever think to even talk to or have a conversation with, but they were all like aglow because they got to watch these leather daddies do scenes with their bottoms that they were just so enamored of, so that's cool.
Wow. Such a big part of sex is the power dynamics that you're describing. How were those affected when you started having a growing celebrity?
Well, there were other people who were in different areas of the entertainment community. There was one guy that I knew. He was an entertainment lawyer. He was deep in the scene. He had a junk, which is a ship. It was parked in I don't know if they parked boats, but he had like a junk, like a Chinese, like a yacht, but it was a legitimate junk that he was trying to sell. And he was very flamboyant and very original and did these sexual things that were just so amazing. And he had very famous clientele. If you're like kind of in Hollywood, there are people in entertainment. One guy I knew, he was the unit publicist for Dawson's Creek. So there was
So you were not the outlier.
No. There was a lot of freaky people who were like in a scene that had, there were elements of they were close to famous people, they knew famous people, or there was sort of famous people around. So there wasn't a sense of like, oh, this is odd. And at that time, there was no camera phones, no smartphones. So you didn't have sort of photographic evidence of things happening. You just sort of had word of mouth and people talking about what they were doing. What's also weird is they would always have chili. Like if you were going to these sex parties, they would always serve some kind of chili. And
that is the weirdest thing you've said yet in this interview.
Yeah. And I was like, that's a weird thing to eat if you're going to have public sex with people. But I mean, I guess you have to keep your strength up. And so they would have chili and chocolate chip cookies and sometimes a very seasoned salt. I think at a sex party, it was the first time I ever had a Stacy's Pita chip. Pretty sure.
I'm fine with the scat play, but not the Stacy's.
Well, it's very salty.
Which one?
They're both salty. I do like a sun chip myself, a multigrain. Then, but it's all carbs. I guess, they're just, people need to, be healthy and,
I feel like I'm still trying to figure out what I like and what I don't like. And I'm still questioning my nature of my desire.
Yeah.
Do you still feel like that?
Yeah, because, you do discover things. Like, I really was trying to be adventurous and I tried to discover different things that I liked. And, I had this idea, I really want to be fisted. But I could never, ever get anybody to get their thumb all the way in. So I felt like a failure at that, because they couldn't get that. And it's a thumb joint. It's not going to go in. It's just too much. So no matter what, some things you just can't do. I think you're always discovering that. So now I'm on a new journey of what does this look like? I have this idea that, because now I'm single, so my thought is I would like to try to remain unpartnered for the rest of my life. And I'm going to really try.
And why do you want to try that?
Well, because I've been partnered for so long for my adult life. I've had partners pretty much, since I, was 25 or whatever. So I feel like now that I'm 50, I should really give it a college try to see if I could just be a lady alone.
So why do you want to try that for the rest of your life and not just for a couple of years?
Well, I mean, it's just to see, every time I've been partnered, it's always been this issue. I've always really wished to be alone. And I would really like to give that a fair shot because that's what I've always wanted. And so maybe that solitary life is really important. But I do want to have sex still. That's a very confusing thing to me too, because I have not been single in the age of apps. So I'm like trying to start that journey to see what it looks like.
That's so interesting. I mentioned representation for bisexual people. I think that it's so important just in general. And we never see single people represented on screen where it's not like a fatal flaw.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You know, we never see a single person go home and they're not crying at the end of the day.
Right. And it's so wonderful to celebrate that. I went on a vacation myself and I had the best time. And it was so fulfilling, and I was like, I've missed out on this for because of the dream of being partnered. And this goes for being gay or straight or bi or whatever. The dream of being partnered is such a pervasive one in our society that you can't escape it. And people who are alone are suspect.
Yeah.
You know, like that confirmed bachelor, like what's wrong?
I think that when people like you are so comfortable talking about sex, that people often think like, oh, it's an addiction. Like she's going home every night, just like fucking every guy she sees, or a woman or non-binary person.
Yeah.
But like, that's not actually the case though, right?
No. I mean, I think like it's sort of like, I do love sex, but I realize that I can't really get anything out of it. You know, like the thing about like sex addiction is like you're really trying to look for some sort of salvation within that interaction, and that's not going to happen. But I do get some physical satisfaction out of it and some gratification emotionally, but it's not going to lead to anything, you know? So sex addiction is kind of, it just results in a lot of rashes.
How has your relationship to masturbation changed?
I do try to be more creative, and I try to be more alert as to like, well, you know, I'm not going to come to this one again because I already came to that. So I'm going to try to come to something different, and I'm not going to stop until I can do it, you know? So I'm like really going to be very...
You're setting goals.
I'm setting goals, but I'm also trying not to be so numb. It's also using my vibrators. Like I'm trying to switch to a different kind of vibration. So my recommendation for most people who like vibrators is to go to the Eroscillator because it doesn't numb you out as like other vibration does.
It's so interesting because when I talk about sex with my friends or even you, it feels taboo in a fun way, but discussing masturbation is like a bit too much for me, actually.
Yeah.
Like I still have that taboo.
Yeah. I think it's a necessary part of sexuality, especially to kind of discover what you like so that when you have partnered sex that you can instruct them on what to do, and then maybe they'll show you what they need, which I think is what masturbation is really good for, is that it's going to give somebody this entry into my being that is very exclusive and very, very intimate and very important. And if somebody else can grasp that and then possibly reciprocate, that's intimacy. You know, that's really true love if that was to exist. But that's what I think it is.
Do you not think it does exist?
I think it exists in ways. I think that there is love definitely that can exist and has existed before in my life. But in my life, it's been very fleeting and really compromised also by the necessity of togetherness, marriage, the kind of partnering that I'm trying to avoid.
How many times have you been properly in love?
Properly in love? Oh, gosh. I would say a good 15 or 16 times.
Holy shit.
In my life. But then it's been compromised by the situation at hand, by what we tried to turn it into, by whatever they were looking for, whatever I was looking for. It was always something that was stunted because of something that we were trying to force.
15 or 16 is a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
In like an impressive way. Like that's nice.
Yeah, it's good because it's like if I do try to keep my heart open, which can be challenging because you do get your feelings hurt. But it's also like it's just sort of how I'd rather be.
Have you seen a change in how receptive people are to polyamory?
Yeah, I think a lot of young people really idealize it. I think every young person does go through a phase like after the initial rush of their sort of sexual awakening, then they go into a thing of like experimental ideation, like whether it's polyamory or leather or fetishism or whatever, that they do want to go into a different sort of sensibility. And I think that a lot of people are very hooked into this idea of polyamory, especially because of the way that millennials that I notice have sex, because of like the bounty, that the abundance of partners that are out there. You know, when you're presented with these apps, which I haven't been on yet, but I do know that they look and look and look and look, and there's so many people, it seems like there's this infinite amount of people that you could do it with. So they want to keep their like mind open to it.
And I think people don't have practice in approaching someone in a bar because it feels uncomfortable and like it's supposed to feel uncomfortable. That's okay.
Yeah.
But people just avoid that. I mean, like just for me, like one of my big pet peeves is meeting somebody out. They really are kind of standoffish and cold. And then later that night, they send you like a Facebook message like, hey, it was so nice to meet you. We should get a drink sometime. Like we could have just got a drink.
I know, right then. And it's so weird. When you come from an age of like, we didn't have phones to hook up before. We couldn't get dick like that. We had to get dick by pounding the pavement and going and get that dick right face to face. When you're in that like mentality with, as I was for so long, then, and dick is also, I'm just using dick as it really is dick and
the
pussy
gender
and
neutral
whatever.
dick.
Yeah, it's anything. But dick is sex. You know, so having that experience of knowing how you could get it before, it just seems like it would be hard for people who only have done it through like phones or social media.
Another thing that society has caught up to you about is sex work. That's been a really big topic of conversation lately. How old were you and like why did you get into it?
Well, I got into it and I was into it with my friend. We'd gotten these jobs where we were phone sex operators, but then we got moved because we could follow a script and we started writing them. And so we did these like phone sex for English as a second language. And so it was like teaching English, but by using these like phone sex messages. It was really weird. We would make like $100 every time we did it. And we do like 3 or 4 a day. And so this was in probably like 90, 91. I'd started doing it, I was probably like 16 or 17. So it was the mid 80s. And it wasn't a big deal. And then I tried to be a dominatrix, but I was not very good at it. And I just didn't really, I appreciate like all of that, but I don't want to actually do it as a job because it's a lot of work. You know,
it's taxing.
To me, that was really way too much work. And I hurt my back and I don't want to do this. Being
a dominatrix is also really emotionally taxing, right?
Yeah. I mean, I really admire all of the doms that are out there. To me, it's really amazing. You know, like I wouldn't have the energy to do it.
Most of the conversations I hear are about survival sex work, which is very important to talk about. But it seems like people are less comfortable talking about women and men who just choose to like engage in sex work.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people that just do it because that's just what they want to do. And I think that they should have the freedom to do that. And I don't know why anybody would be hung up on it. You know, to me, I think that's great. You know, if somebody is really enthusiastic. And, you know, I think that really meaningful engagement can come through sex work. You know, sometimes people have sex workers that they just really treasure and love. So, I mean, there's something that's really beautiful about that. I know that there's a dark side, and of course there's a lot of exploitation, and this isn't even getting into human trafficking or anything like that. That's not the issue that I'm thinking about when I think about sex work. I think about, you know, people who really just love it and that do it and that feel empowered doing it, and that's cool.
I don't want you to think I'm calling you old because I don't think you're old. But that said, do you feel like you're considered an elder in the comedy community?
Yes, and that's
really
great. No, I love it. I think that's really important too. Like, I think that comedy and older women, it's one place that we're really welcome in entertainment. Our age is really an advantage. So it's what I learned from Joan Rivers, who is very adamant about that. Like, they're always going to want you. And that's really great. And that's really true. And so I'm really grateful for that. I think it's really exciting too that there's a lot of comedians nowadays who were really inspired by the fact that I got to do it. So that's my greatest achievement, is that people were inspired.
I almost have to let you go, but you've done so much in your career and it's not anywhere near over yet. What do you still want to do?
I would love to do anything. You know, I'd love to do more. I feel like there's a lot left to do and I just want to do it. And I don't care what it is. I just want to keep on.
This has been so much fun. Thank you.
Yeah, very great questions. I'm looking forward to listening.
Thank you.
I wonder if that's Ellen.
And that was the great comedian Margaret Cho, recorded in September of 2019. And then, as I mentioned, next week we're back with a brand new interview. It is somebody terribly interesting from the sports world, so stay tuned for that. And until then, if you enjoyed this interview, please share it with one friend. Just one. That's all we're asking. Doing things like that really are the biggest ways you can help our show continue to grow. So thank you so much for that. We're brought to you by The Advocate magazine in partnership with GLAAD. I'm Jeffrey Masters. I will see you next week. Bye.